Like I said, welcome to Christian Church of Lemon Grove. My name is Chris. I'm one of the pastors here. Will, our normal preaching pastor, is out of town at a conference, so he's just kind of getting some well-needed rest and like refuel and stuff like that. So we're gonna be praying for them as they're traveling back this week. But Will gave me the real fun task of finishing up this series of the happiness myth. This has been an eight-week-long series now, and it's getting to the point now. I was really thankful that Will let me talk about all the really uncomfortable stuff that happens at the end of Judges. So get ready for that as we dive into this. First and foremost, I want to start off with a little disclaimer. I'm going to tell you a story that I don't remember at all because I was 3 years old when it happened, and Will told me that it would be a really good story to tell for this. So, first of all, anyone like boxing in the room? Anyone? Raise their hands. Great, because I don't, and that's why I don't know anything about this. All right, so if you have questions after I explain this story, find one of those people that raise their hands, and they'll explain it to you better than I can. All right, February 10th in 1990, one of the greatest boxers to ever live entered into the Tokyo Dome in Tokyo, Japan. His name is Mike Tyson, if you've heard of him. This is before he got that face tattoo. He was the undefeated heavyweight champion of the world at the time with a record of 37-0. He's kind of like the Ronda Rousey or Floyd Mayweather of our day, but according to Will, better than them. I don't know. Tyson's opponent in that match was a 42-1 betting underdog named Buster Douglas. Now, Buster Douglas had a terrible record, 29-4-1, and this, in the last time that he fought in any kind of a title fight, Douglas got knocked out in 10 rounds. So he's not exactly what you would call the cream of the crop as far as boxers. But for some reason, he was slated to face Mike Tyson. But this is right before Tyson was supposed to be fighting Evander Holyfield, and so everyone kind of thought that this would be like Tyson's warm-up match, that his chance to kind of just get his muscles stretched before he faced Holyfield. And the beginning of the fight was pretty obvious that Buster Douglas was not afraid of Mike Tyson. He had nothing to lose because he was a loser, and so he came out swinging. He threw some punches onto Mike Tyson, got some big hits in. In the middle of rounds, he actually managed to connect a hook onto Tyson's eye that caused his eye to swell up. And for some reason, despite the fact that at any time, everyone that knows boxing knows that you have this stuff that can stop swelling that they can inject into you in the corner. Well, Tyson's trainers thought that since he was fighting this guy, Buster Douglas, they didn't need it. So they didn't bring the stop swell or whatever it's called. And so because of that, Tyson's eye continued to swell throughout the entire fight to the point where he couldn't see. As the 9th round started, they came out swinging. It seemed like Tyson was starting to get a little bit of the upper hand. He laid some punches into Douglas that caused Douglas to actually hit the mat for 10 seconds. And everyone was kind of hoping, oh, that's the end of this fight. But no, he got back up. As they continued to fight, Douglas came in at a fury of punches, connected 4 in a row into Tyson's face on the opposite side of where his eye was swollen. And this caused Mike Tyson to hit the ground for 10 seconds, which is a knockout in boxing. So the underdog, Buster Douglas, ended up knocking out the champion, Mike Tyson. And it's one of the greatest upsets in boxing history, like I said, according to Will. And Buster Douglas became the undisputed heavyweight champion, which doesn't make any sense. But that's what happened. The truth is that Buster Douglas had no business fighting Mike Tyson in this fight. He had no business going up against someone with Tyson's record. He had no business being able to connect punches onto Tyson's face. But the problem is that Mike Tyson thought the same thing. He thought, this guy has no business fighting me. This guy has no business being here. And so they didn't prepare in the right way. Tyson didn't think that Douglas was a worthy competitor, probably up until the point where he got knocked out. And so this kind of segues us into our topic for today, is that's the idea that there's nothing that can set you up for failure faster than underestimating your opponent. That's what Mike Tyson did. He didn't really think that Buster Douglas had what it took, and Buster Douglas had other ideas. And so we're going to get in, as I said, this is the conclusion of our series, The Happiness Myth. We're going to talk about the dangers of underestimating things. We're going to talk about how we've spent the last 8 weeks reading through the book of Judges, learning that there's a happiness myth and it isn't true. The happiness myth, if you don't know, if you haven't been following along with this, if you'd like to, you can check out our stuff online or through our app. But we've been saying that the happiness myth is this idea that your way is the best way, that you know what's best in your life, that you know how to get everything the right way to make you happy. Now raise your hand if that's you. You know that everything that you do, everything that is your choice is the best thing that you've ever done, always. Put your hand down, Victor. If that were true, we'd be happy. Every single one of us would always be happy, but we're not. There's 43% of Americans that are on some kind of mood-altering drug to show that we're not always happy. We are regularly meeting people in our life that we seem to think that they're happy until we get to really know them, right? A lot of people put on that front of happiness. There's this idea that we are not really in it for the long haul of what we do. We just kind of find immediate small doses of happiness and hope that those will last us. In the book of Judges, it's teaching us that God's ways are actually the best ways in our lives. It's teaching us that through the example of the nation of Israel, they kind of kept thinking, man, we have the right plan. We know where we're going. We know where we're headed. And they continuously did not follow along with what God had planned for them. So no matter what it feels like, no matter how green it is, and how green the grass is on the other side, if we fully commit ourselves to God's ways, we can end up living with lives of joy, peace, and fulfillment. How many of you could use a little bit more of joy, peace, or fulfillment in your life, right? That's right. That's more hands. Victor, put your hand up. There you go. All right. So I'm convinced for myself, and probably all of you in this room, but I don't know, but I'm just guessing, that you probably underestimate the power of disobedience in your life. I would guess that you might underestimate the power of actually being obedient to things. There's every decision that we make is a decision to either fully embrace God's plan for our life or fully embrace our plan for our life. You get to choose one or the other. And oftentimes we opt to choose what we think is best. That's kind of how we are in our nature. That's how we are as people. We kind of think, man, I have a really great idea. Let's do that idea. Even if it's the total opposite of God's idea for your life. It's not until you find yourselves lying on your backs, knocked out, that you might realize that you're in trouble. For some of you, that might be literal, and some of you, that might be figurative, but that's how we're going to look at this series. We're going to talk about how we underestimate disobedience. Like I said, we all underestimate things in our life. Some of the things that I kind of underestimate a lot are like how long it'll take me to do something. Like, for instance, I'm currently working on building my son his own room because we're expecting a baby, and so we're moving him out of the nursery and into like a big boy room. And I was like, man, I'm gonna knock this out in a couple weeks. That was like 3 months ago. So, that's how things have going. I kind of, I always think, man, I could just do this, and then I start to do it, and I'm like, nah, I don't want to do this. It also, it's easy to underestimate how many calories are in food, right? Or how long it will take to actually you can be like, oh, I can go for a 30-minute walk and those 4 cheeseburgers will go away. It's not true. It's not how it works. One of the things is that I'm starting to realize now as I'm getting a little bit older, and I know I'm not that old, but for instance, I went to a wedding last night and I was like, man, I'm going to be able to last all night long. And then at 10 p.m., I was like, I'm ready to go home and already be in bed. And so those are the kinds of things where I'm like, maybe this is not exactly, I'm not exactly estimating things the correct way or following how I'm supposed to go. Now, a lot of those things are kind of funny, but there's big things, too, that we underestimate. We underestimate how much impact we might have on our child's future. We underestimate the power of our words, right? A lot of us, especially in this modern age of social media, we're willing to just post anything that we want and think anything that we want will be heard by everybody, and that it's okay for us to just say those things. It's not necessarily true that that's going to always be the best way for you to set an example of who you are. We underestimate the compound interest of saving for retirement. At least I know that I do. I don't understand what any of that means. And I just hope that my retirement thing is taking care of itself. It's safe to say that there's some of us in this room that might underestimate how much God actually loves us. I wanted to look into that. Romans 8:37 through 39 kind of says, I'm convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God's love, neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither our fears for today nor our worries about tomorrow, not even the powers of hell can separate us from God's love. To me, that's amazing. That's the idea that, I could preach on that for the rest of the time and not get anything into Judges, and that would be great for me. But that's not what Will said I could do. We're going to tell, like I said, we're getting into some really uncomfortable stuff for the book of Judges. I just wanted to warn you that it is a little strange. It's very dark and twisted. And that's why, Will left, I guess. I don't know. It's so bad, it's almost never talked about. This story, the last 3 chapters of Judges, almost no one talks about it. I'm pretty sure that none of you, if your parents read Bible stories to you when you were a kid, no one got this story read to them before bed. If you grew up in church and you went to Sunday school, they never, ever talked about this part of the Bible. Because if they did, you'd have the weirdest nightmares. It was really hard to read through some of this stuff through the week and kind of keep myself focused on things. That's why I went and did a lot of other things instead of working on my son's room. For God, the nation of Israel has gotten so far away from God and his truths at this time that they're doing unspeakable things that even they never thought they would end up doing. It's just another confirmation that our ways are not the best ways, but that God's ways are the best ways. Now, you've heard it said many times before, but there's always, it's always true in everyone's life is that sin will take you a lot farther than you want to go. I'm sure that you've heard Will say that before. If you're in the youth group, you might have heard me say something similar to that. Sin will always make sure that you go as far as it will take you. And so it's that idea that we're going to start here in the book of Judges, chapters 19 through 21. Now, Will kind of alluded to this story a couple weeks ago. It starts with a man from the tribe of Levi. We don't know his name. We just know that one day he went down to Bethlehem and brought home a woman to be his concubine. Now, a concubine is the equivalent of a live-in girlfriend. They're kind of almost like slaves, but not really slaves. But they aren't these people's wives. Like, he didn't choose her to be his wife. He just chose her to live with him. It comes with a lower status than being a wife. We don't know exactly why this is happening, but it's probably because he was sleeping with someone else and decided to go home and then found this girl and was like, well, I'm going to take her back home. And it's just this kind of shady gray area of what's going on. But he decides for some reason to go to Bethlehem and to stay at her father's house. And after about 4 months, I guess he got lonely. I don't know. He decides to leave. He goes back home and he travels down through Bethlehem and meets with her father to bring her home. But for the next several days, the father and the Levite just partied every night. The father probably had alternative motives in doing this, but At the same time, it was just fun. Every night he kept him late so that he couldn't leave and couldn't travel. Every time that they were done partying, it was too late to leave. It was too late to go to the next town. So it took up to 5. On the 5th day, the Levite decided, you know what? I'm tired of this. I'm leaving. We're going home. He takes his concubine, he takes a servant, he takes a donkey, and he loads them up and he heads home. But because they got a late start because of the partying and all this stuff going on, he isn't able to make it all the way home, and so he stops in a place called Gibeah and spends the night there. Now the custom back during this time is if you were a guest in a town and you needed somewhere to stay, you would go to the middle of the town and wait for someone to come by and invite you to stay at their house. That'd be really weird here because you'd see those people standing in the middle of town and be like, why are they standing there? That's really weird. But in this time, that's what it was. That's what people did. So the Levite took his group, stood in the town square, and waited, and no one offered them residence. Until very late at night, this old man walks by and says, hey, you can stay at my house. And so that's where we're going to start reading in Judges chapter 19, verse 22. It says, while they were enjoying themselves, a crowd of troublemakers from the town surrounded the house and began to beat on the door and shouting to the old man, bring out this man who is staying with you so that we can have sex with him. The old man stepped outside and said, no, my brothers, do not do such an evil thing, for this man is a guest in my house, and such a thing would be shameful. Here, take my virgin daughter and this man's concubine. I will bring them out to you, and you can abuse them and do whatever you like. But don't do such a shameful thing to this man. But they wouldn't listen to him. So the Levite took hold of his concubine and pushed her out the door. The men of the town abused her all night long, taking turns raping her until the morning. Finally, at dawn, they let her go. And at daybreak, the woman returned to the house where her husband was staying. She collapsed at the door of the house and lay there until it was light. When her husband opened the door to leave, there lay his concubine with her hands on the threshold. He said, get up and let's go. But there was no answer from her. So they put her body on the back of the donkey and they took her home. Now, like I said, this story is getting real weird. We're going to take a quick break and take a breath. What we just read is not something that we would really wish on even our worst of enemies. As gruesome as this was, it wasn't uncommon for men in a town at this time to treat guests like this. This was common practice across the nation of Israel. It was actually formulated through a Canaanite tradition. Now, it's not about necessarily enjoying to do this thing. It's about humiliating the person that you're doing it to. It's a barbaric show of strength and manhood that they would come through. And any time that a man was traveling through a town, Canaanites would come in and they would take people out and they would rape them to show them that they didn't belong there. These are the same Canaanites that were living amongst God's people, the same Canaanites that God had said 400 years earlier to get rid of, but the people of Israel didn't do that. In Judges 1:29, we see that the tribe of Ephraim failed to drive out the Canaanites living in Gezer, so the Canaanites continued to live there among them. So if you remember back to the first week of this series, we read in Numbers chapter 33 that God gave the people very clear instructions before they ever moved into the promised land of what to do. Numbers 33, 51 through 55 reads as following. Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. When you cross the Jordan River into the land of Canaan, you must drive out all the people living there. You must destroy all of their carved and molten images and demolish all of their pagan shrines. Take possession of the land and settle in it, because I have given it to you to occupy. But if you fail to drive out the people who live in this land, those who remain will be like splinters in your eyes and thorns in your sides. They will harass you in the land wherever you live. So God's not giving them a standard of how to do things to restrict them. He's giving them a standard of how to live for their own good. Now we can see in the story 400 years later, as a society, the people's hearts have moved away from God's ways. They've embraced the ways of the Canaanites that are living amongst them. They're doing the things that seem right to them. And if this story isn't already bad enough, it doesn't stop there. It keeps going. The concubine dies. The Levite gets home determined to seek some kind of justice for what has happened. And so he sits down and writes a letter to all 12 tribes of Israel. They're kind of like states in this time. The 12 tribes, they're kind of organized like similar to our states. So he's writing to the heads of each of these places, and he explains what happens. But then he thinks to himself, wait a second. Nobody is going to care if I just send a letter. So he has another idea. In Judges 19:29, he says, when he got home, he took a knife and he cut his concubine's body into 12 pieces. And he sent one piece to each tribe throughout all of the territory of Israel. Right? I told you this was going to be messed up and dark. Now, what's really crazy is what I want you to notice is that in the very next verse, everyone who saw it says, such a horrible crime has never been committed in all of the time since Israel has left Egypt. So let's just paraphrase this idea. They open a box, they see a body part and a letter, and they go, oh, I wonder what this letter says. And they read it, and they're like, man, this is really bad. I've never seen anything this bad. I didn't think things would get this bad. But they don't really care if you think about it. They're not fazed by the fact that someone has sent them a body part. They're not fazed by what the true thing is. They're just like, wow, I didn't realize it'd get so bad that someone would send me a letter about this. We don't really have time to read the rest of this story, but it gets really bad. They decide to attack the people that did this, and a civil war breaks out. They kill everyone except for 800 men that are Canaanite. And they feel bad that they did that, and so they let these 800 men go out and kidnap wives for themselves in the land of Israel, and to be able to repopulate their tribe. And as I read this, I was just sitting there going, that doesn't make any sense. They just were told they needed to drive these people out, 400 years ago. They knew what was going on. This guy sent 12 letters with 12 body parts. And then they were like, you know what? That was kind of messed up of us to attack those people. Let's go have them do the same stuff that they had already been doing. And the author of this book ends with the sentence that he has kind of given us a few other times. And it's kind of the theme idea of Judges. In Judges 21:25, it says, in those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. And that's just it. It just ends. That's how the book ends. 400 years after a group of people decided God's ways were asking too much of them and that their ways seem better, this is what their life is like. They think, I can do whatever is right. As long as I don't hurt anyone, it'll be okay. God's ways and instructions are helpful and great if someone wants to embrace them, but they're not necessarily for everyone. It's not. It doesn't. You don't live a life of my life will be better and I will get what I want if you follow God's ways. That's not the promise. It's not true, and we know it's not true because some of us every week, every day, we deal with a hurt or a pain based off of a decision that someone else has made or that we have made. Your mom or dad might have been sure that the grass is greener on the other side, and they decided to leave the family. And they were thinking, man, I can find happiness somewhere else. But they didn't. They didn't realize that they were going to be hurting people. They didn't realize that they were going to be leaving things behind. You might be trying to raise a family by yourself right now because someone else decided that they could find something better. You might face that hurt every single day. Some of us will learn that have learned from our parents that money is just a means to find happiness and not something that we actually need. And so we continue to buy things in order to fill that void of happiness. And it just will never be filled. The more things that you have, the less happy that you typically are. Maybe we've lost a job at a company that had to close because the boss decided to do something that he thought was right. Maybe you are here and you can't find a job or a place to live because of decisions that might have seemed right at some point in your life, but now they've left you with a mark on your record. When we decide to use our judgment as the standard for life instead of God's clear instructions and standards, inevitably at some point, whether it's 2 months, 2 years, 20 years, or 2 generations later, lots of people's lives will be ruined by the things that we thought were right and not the things that God thought was right. We commit ourselves to gods, the lowercase g gods in our own lives all the time. We find ways to fill those voids. We find things like television to fill that void of happiness. We find things outside of the house that don't honor our families or honor God to fill those things. We spent 8 weeks talking about the different angles and different stories, and Will has made 3 points each time that he thinks that we should kind of follow through of how to follow God's plan. But I just want to leave you with 1 point on this. It's that God's ways are the best way for your best life. God's ways are not meant to inhibit you or to restrict you. They're meant to bless you and keep you from a life of constant temptation. God doesn't want you to faithfully and consistently connect to a church family because he wants you to lose all the enjoyment of Sunday mornings. It's not why you're here. We're not here because we don't want to go fishing. We don't want to watch football when it's football season. We're here to connect with each other because God wants us to experience the blessings of life together, of relationships that we can make in this place. God is not selfish that we are independent from his choices, but he is giving us promises that will help us further what we're supposed to do with our lives. There's lots of things that people are told you shouldn't do this because God says you're not supposed to do that. Now, that's not always true. It's not that it's forbidden for us. For instance, a lot of people think, wow, I can just have sex outside of marriage and it'll be totally fine. But God intended it to be inside of your marriage because it gives you someone to trust and to partner with to do those things and not to just give away parts of yourself to other people. God doesn't want us to forgive people that have hurt us just because he wants us to be doormats and to be taken advantage of us. God wants us to forgive those people so that when we wrong other people and they forgive us, we can feel that same kind of connectedness and togetherness. He wants us to understand that there are blessings that we are given because through forgiveness, such as his son on the cross. That's forgiveness that we can never repay, and yet it was given to us anyways. God doesn't ask us to tithe and give generously because he doesn't want us to have nice things or enjoy having fun stuff. It's because God wants us to know that our money isn't ours, it's his, and we're giving it back to him. He wants us to know that if we live a life that's addicted to the things that we can constantly give ourselves, then that's not a life that's worth living. A life that relies on God is a life that's worth living. He wants us to protect us from those ideas that greed will always give us something, but greed always leaves you empty. God is the only thing that can fulfill you. God doesn't want us to take a Sabbath rest day because he wants us to fall behind on our competitors or not be able to be productive. He gives us this because he wants us to experience the blessings of our life rested, recharged,